The rain began so softly that the city barely seemed to notice. There was no thunder, no sudden rush of wind, no hurried footsteps as people ran for cover. The rain simply arrived the way a sleepy thought arrives at the end of a long day, quietly, gently, almost kindly. It touched the rooftops first, then the narrow sidewalks, then the glass panes of darkened windows, until the whole evening seemed wrapped in a silver hush. On a small street in the older part of town, the light from the shop windows had mostly gone out. A tailor's sign swayed only a little above a locked door. A bakery stood empty behind misted glass, its shelves clean and bare for the night. A florist's awning dripped steadily over a row of closed buckets, and a cafe had long since turned its chairs upside down on the tables inside. It was the kind of street people often forgot in the daytime, hidden between busier roads and larger buildings. But on nights like this it felt like a world all its own. The paving stones held the rain in shallow, shining pools. Street lamps cast warm circles onto the wet ground, and every little reflection trembled gently whenever another drop fell. Somewhere water trickled through an iron grate. Somewhere else, a gutter sang a soft metallic rhythm. The trees that lined the far end of the street stood dark and still, their leaves receiving the rain without complaint. And halfway down that quiet street, one shop was still open. Its sign hung above a painted wooden door whose green color had softened over the years into something deep and restful. Like moss in shade, gold letters curved gently across the sign. Merriweather Books. The front window glowed with amber light. Not bright light, not sharp or electric, but the warm kind that spills from lampshades and settles across polished wood. Inside, through the faint blur of rain on glass, you could see tall shelves, a small ladder on rails, a reading chair by the front window, and near the back, a brass lamp burning over a counter. It was the sort of light that suggested patience, the sort of light that promised there was no need to hurry. If you had been walking down that street that night, with the rain tapping softly at your coat and the day still lingering somewhere in your mind, you might have slowed when you saw that window. You might have paused just for a second beneath the awning next door, listening to the rain. You might have noticed the way the shop looked not merely open, but welcoming, as if it had been waiting for someone to arrive. And perhaps, after a breath or two, you would have crossed the pavement and reached for the brass handle of the door. The bell above it would have given a small, delicate ring as you stepped inside. Not loud, not cheerful in a busy way. Just a tiny note of acknowledgement, like the shop quietly saying, "There you are." Warmth would meet you first. Not the heavy warmth of a crowded room, but a gentle, settled warmth that came from lamps, old wood, thick curtains, and a kettle somewhere in the back. The air smelled faintly of paper, cedar, tea leaves, and rain-damp wool. The scent of old books was there too. Of course, that dry, comforting fragrance of cloth bindings and aging pages that always seemed to carry a little time inside it. The floorboards beneath your feet were dark and polished, softened by many years of footsteps. They gave the smallest creak here and there, not from weakness, but from familiarity, as though the shop itself liked to know where people were. For a moment, you might have stood just inside the door, letting your eyes adjust. The front of the shop was arranged like an invitation to linger. A reading chair upholstered in faded rust-colored velvet sat beside the window with a knitted blanket folded over one arm. A tiny round table stood next to it, holding a ceramic lamp and a little dish filled with wrapped peppermint sweets. By the glass, rain traced silver paths downward while the city beyond faded into a moving watercolor of gold and gray. Further inside, shelves stretched up toward the ceiling in quiet, orderly rows. Some held books standing neatly side by side. Others had small horizontal stacks, as if a hand had meant to sort them but decided instead that they looked nice exactly where they were. Here and there were framed sketches. A pot of ivy, a porcelain bird, a brass clock that ticked so softly you could hear it only when the room became very still. At the back of the shop, behind a long counter with a green-shaded lamp, stood the bookseller. She was older, though not in a way that could be easily counted. Her silver hair was braided and wound at the back of her head. She wore a charcoal cardigan over a blouse the color of cream, and a pair of reading glasses rested low on her nose. One hand was placed lightly on an open book on the counter, as though she had been reading when you entered and had no objection at all to being interrupted. When she looked up, her eyes were calm and bright. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was low and soft, carrying easily through the warm air of the shop. "Come in out of the rain." You would have smiled, perhaps a little apologetically, as if you needed a reason to have entered. But she would not have asked for one. People often imagine that bookshops are places for choosing what to read, what to buy, what to carry home. But some bookshops, especially the quiet ones, understand that sometimes a person enters simply because they need to be somewhere gentle for a little while. "You're welcome to have a look around," she said, "and there's tea, if you'd like some." You might have thanked her and slipped off your damp coat, or loosened your scarf, or simply exhaled in that small way people do when they realize they have, for a moment at least, reached shelter. The bookseller moved with no sign of hurry. She placed a slender ribbon between the pages of the book she had been reading and closed it with care. Then she lifted a teapot from a warmer and poured amber tea into a blue and white cup. "It's spiced pear tonight," she said, "very mild, good for rainy evenings." The cup she offered was warm in your hands. Steam rose in a slow curl carrying the faint fragrance of pear, cinnamon, and something floral you couldn't quite name. You took a cautious sip. It was gentle and soothing, with just enough sweetness to feel comforting. "Thank you," you said. She nodded, as though this, too, was part of the rain's natural order. "Take your time." And so you did. You began at the nearest shelf, not because you were looking for something in particular, but because beginning anywhere seemed enough. There were small handwritten labels at the ends of each row: travel, poetry, nature, letters, essays, history, cookbooks, music, myth, shelves of novels arranged not by strict alphabet but by a logic that felt more human than formal, as though books that belonged in the same mood had quietly found each other. You moved slowly, one hand around the warm cup, the other tracing the spines as you passed. Cloth-bound books, paperbacks with softened corners, hardcovers with little embossed stars, faded titles, deckled pages. Some were old enough that their colors had mellowed into shades impossible to manufacture on purpose. Dusty rose, smoky blue, leaf green, tea brown, deep maroon. From somewhere high above came the faintest rustle, perhaps from the building settling, perhaps from rain against the roof. The clock on the shelf ticked. A page turned behind the counter. The rain continued its patient conversation with the window. There is a kind of peace that comes only when no one needs anything from you. No tasks, no replies, no decisions that matter, no need to perform being awake and capable and efficient. In places like that little bookshop, peace did not demand a grand transformation. It came in simple forms: the weight of a teacup, the softness of lamplight, the sound of turning pages, the permission to wander without purpose. You followed the aisle toward the middle of the shop where the shelves narrowed into little corridors. Here the light was dimmer and even more golden. A rolling ladder stood asleep against a high shelf. A small stool had been tucked into a corner beneath a display of antique maps. Somewhere nearby, you could smell the faint waxy sweetness of a candle recently extinguished. One shelf held books about old houses and lost gardens. Another contained travel journals from long train journeys, coastal towns, mountain villages. There were memoirs of lighthouse keepers, sketchbooks of botanists, collections of letters written from quiet places. You paused before a section simply labeled evenings. That was unusual enough to make you smile. The books there seemed chosen not by subject but by feeling. Stories that took place in twilight, poems about dusk, essays on lamplight, winter suppers, late trains, stargazing, rainy streets, and moonlit harbors. A book of paintings showing windows at night. Another on inns and guest houses in remote corners of Europe. A slim volume called The Art of Resting. Perhaps you would have taken one out and opened it. Inside, on the first page, there was a small stamp. Merriweather Books. For quiet company on long evenings. You ran your thumb across the ink, then set the book gently back. As you wandered deeper into the shop, the world outside became less distinct. The rain remained, but it no longer felt like weather pressing in from beyond the glass. Instead, it became part of the room's own atmosphere, a companion sound, steady and reassuring. The city beyond the window softened further until it seemed impossible that there were bright shops and rushing buses and glowing screens anywhere at all. At the end of one narrow aisle, a chair stood tucked between two shelves beneath a lamp with a yellow shade. On the seat was a sleeping cat. It was a grey cat, old enough to have lost all interest in first impressions. One ear was tipped. Its paws were tucked beneath it. When it opened one eye to look at you, there was no alarm there, only a brief evaluation, after which it concluded that you were acceptable and closed the eye again. "Her name is Linen," came the bookseller's voice from somewhere behind you. You turned. She had appeared with such quiet steps that she might have been part of the bookshop itself. "She approves of people who move slowly," the bookseller added. You smiled. "Then I'll be careful to keep up the standard." "That would be best," she said, and for a moment there was the smallest hint of amusement in her voice. She looked at the shelf beside you. "If you enjoy being reined in, that section is particularly good." The books there were full of weather, storm diaries, novels set in inns, stories of fog and sea cliffs and snowy stations and warm kitchens at dusk. She drew one book halfway from the shelf and handed it to you. "This one," she said, "contains almost no distress at all. Only letters written between two cousins who each believe the other lives a far more interesting life." You laughed softly. "It's a lovely misunderstanding," she said, very restful. Then, with the unspoken confidence of someone who knew her shop better than anyone ever could, she inclined her head toward the back left corner. "You may also like the room through there." There had been no sign from where you stood that another room existed at all. But when she moved one hanging curtain aside, a narrow doorway appeared, and beyond it lay a smaller chamber lit by two table lamps and the low glow of a fire. A fire. Not large, not dramatic, but very real, burning in a small cast iron stove set into an old brick hearth. Its flame moved in amber folds behind the glass door, giving off that unmistakable warmth which seems to reach not just the hands and face, but something quieter and deeper in a person. The room beyond was perhaps once a parlor, or perhaps a study. Now it held 3 armchairs, a braided rug, a low table with a ceramic bowl of clementines, and 2 walls lined floor to ceiling with books. Rain tapped lightly at a side window. where heavy curtains had been left partly open to reveal the dark outline of a courtyard garden beyond. "This room stays open late," the bookseller said. "People read here sometimes, or they sit. Both are equally acceptable." You thanked her again, because it seemed impossible not to. She left you there with your tea, and you chose the chair nearest the stove. The cushion gave just enough beneath you. The blanket folded across the back smelled faintly of lavender and cedar. The room held that deep, layered silence found only in old buildings on rainy nights, when sound is softened by fabric, paper, brick, and flame. You placed your cup on the low table and let your gaze drift around the room. On one shelf, the books were arranged in dusky colors from pale cream to smoky gray. On another, the spines were mixed with little objects: a compass, a carved wooden fox, a shell the size of a child's palm, a framed photograph of a harbor in fog, a silver letter opener shaped like a feather. Nothing seemed decorative in the deliberate way of shops that try too hard. Everything looked as though it had arrived there honestly, over time, and had been allowed to stay. A little notebook lay on the table beside the clementines. Its pages were filled with neat handwriting from many different people. Perhaps a guest book, perhaps recommendations, perhaps thoughts left behind by evening visitors who had once sat exactly where you were sitting now. You opened to a page in the middle. One entry read, "Found shelter here during a November storm. Left 2 hours later feeling as though I had been gently rearranged." Another read, "The tea, the rain, the cat, the chair by the stove. I needed nothing else." A third simply said, "Thank you for keeping a place where quiet is not mistaken for emptiness." You closed the notebook softly. The rain on the side window became more noticeable here. Not louder, only closer. It tapped against the pane and slid downward, drop by drop, while the stove gave a faint settled hum. From the front of the shop, very distant now, came the occasional whisper of the clock and once, faintly, the bell of the front door as someone else might have entered, or perhaps only the wind shifting it. You leaned back. It is a rare pleasure to be somewhere that asks so little of your attention. Most places ask for choices, responses, movement, alertness. Even comfort is often loud about itself. But this room offered something quieter than comfort. It offered ease, the kind that lets the shoulders soften a little, the jaw unclench, the thoughts lengthen into slower shapes. You looked toward the shelf beside the stove and chose a book almost at random. It was bound in dark green cloth and titled Hours of Rain. Inside were short pieces, observations, diary entries, fragments about weather, windows, rooms, late suppers, station platforms, and the strange tenderness of ordinary evenings when rain keeps people indoors. You read a page, then another. Soon you were no longer reading so much as drifting alongside the words. One piece described a woman mending gloves by lamplight while rain washed the garden path. Another spoke of listening to water collect in a stone courtyard after midnight. Another recalled the smell of wet umbrellas in a railway hotel and the comfort of hearing other guests move quietly along the corridor. There was no plot to follow. Only images, moods, gentle recognitions. Outside the little room's side window, a branch moved once and settled again. The bookseller returned after some time with a small plate of biscuits and refreshed your tea without ever disturbing the room's hush. "I hope the stove isn't too warm," she said. "It's perfect," you answered. She nodded. "Rain like this tends to stay for a while." There was something nice in that sentence. The absence of complaint. Rain was not inconvenience here. It was atmosphere, occasion, companion. "Do many people come in this late?" you asked. Some do, she said, usually when they need to pause before going home, or before going somewhere else, or before deciding what home means for the evening. That sounded like the sort of answer that contained more truth than explanation. She seemed to know that too, because she smiled slightly and added, "Not everyone needs a book. Sometimes they only need a room where no one expects them to be less tired than they are." You held that thought for a while after she left. No one expects them to be less tired than they are. It felt like something worth writing down, or remembering later, though perhaps this room itself would remember it for you. As the evening deepened, the bookshop seemed to become even more itself. The fire settled lower and redder. The lamps made smaller islands of light. The rain softened and then strengthened again, shifting its rhythm in subtle waves. Somewhere in the front, Linen the cat may have changed chairs, because you heard a brief thump followed by silence. The old building gave the occasional tiny creak, as though stretching in its sleep. You read for a little while longer, then closed the green book and simply held it in your lap. Sometimes the nicest part of reading is not the reading itself, but the pause afterward, the moment when the mind rests gently between what it has absorbed and what it no longer needs to think about. Like a bridge suspended over still water. Your eyes wandered to the side window. Beyond the glass was a courtyard not much larger than a room, enclosed by brick walls darkened by rain. A single lantern hung beneath a small overhang, its flame protected from the weather. Below it sat a bench and several clay pots filled with herbs and a tiny lemon tree. The leaves shone wetly. Rain fell through the lantern light in fine bright threads. You imagined the courtyard in summer, perhaps with the window open and the smell of rosemary in the air. You imagined it in winter with frost around the edges of the panes and the bench dusted white. You imagined mornings when the bookseller might stand there with tea before opening the shop, or evenings when she might water the pots after closing, though on a night like this the sky had done the work for her. There was a feeling in that room, not only of shelter, but of continuity, as though the bookshop had stood through many rainy nights, welcoming many tired people, asking little, keeping a record not in ledgers but in atmosphere. Lamps lit, tea poured, curtains drawn, blankets folded, pages turned, again and again, over years, quietly, reliably. After a while, you rose and carried your cup back toward the front of the shop. The path through the curtain felt slightly dreamlike now, as if you were moving between one kind of quiet and another. In the main room, the lamps were still golden but dimmer. The bookseller stood on the ladder halfway up a shelf, returning books to their places. Linen had relocated to the velvet chair by the window and now slept with the absolute seriousness only cats and very small children possess. "I was wondering," the bookseller said as she climbed down, "whether you might like to see something." There was no urgency in her tone, so you found yourself answering yes before you knew what was being offered. She led you to the counter and lifted the hinged section that opened behind it. There, past a cabinet of wrapped parcels and a stand of bookmarks, a narrow staircase rose toward the upper floor. "Most people think it's storage," she said. "Much of it is, but not all." The stairs were old and pleasantly uneven in the middle from many years of use. A lamp on the wall gave just enough light to follow her upward. The scent changed as you climbed. Less tea and cedar now. More paper and lavender and dust warmed by old plaster. At the top, she opened a door. The room beyond took a moment to understand. It was not large, but it was high-ceilinged and tucked beneath the slope of the roof. Shelves lined two walls, though these books were different, older, stranger, less public somehow. In the center of the room stood a long table with reading lamps and several stacks of atlases. sketchbooks, and cloth-bound ledgers. A large window looked out over the rain-dark rooftops, and beneath that window stood a cushioned bench piled with pillows. "This is the upper room," the bookseller said, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. "It's where I keep books that aren't quite for sale yet, or books I'm not entirely ready to part with, and things that arrive when they mean to." You moved farther inside. The room felt like a secret, though not a hidden one, more like a space that remained quiet simply because only certain evenings deserved it. Rain traced the roof window above in silver branches. The bench by the large window looked out across chimneys and lamp-glossed slate, where other windows shone here and there like distant hearths suspended in the dark. One shelf held travel diaries. Another held collections of letters. There were books on gardens, maps of old railways, folk tales from remote villages, manuals for watchmakers, painters' journals, volumes of pressed botanical drawings, and several beautiful editions with no titles at all on their spines. The bookseller walked to a cabinet and opened its glass doors. Inside were rows of small notebooks tied with ribbon. "These," she said, "are from people who visited and wrote something before they left. Not every visitor, only the ones who felt like it." She did not offer you one at first. She simply let you stand in that room and listen to the rain. Below, the world had become very far away. No traffic sounds reached up here. No hurry of footsteps. Only weather, distant rooms, and the hush of pages waiting on shelves. "It's peaceful," you said at last. "Yes," she replied. "I think rooftops are often peaceful. They remind us that most lives are taking place indoors somewhere. In lamplight, cups of tea, folded laundry, unread books, half-finished letters. It can be nice to remember that." You looked out again. A light turned off in a nearby building. Another remained lit behind gauzy curtains. Smoke or mist moved briefly over the line of chimneys and dissolved into the rain. "It's easy," the bookseller said, "to imagine the world as only its busiest parts. But at any given moment, there are countless quiet rooms. I've always found that comforting." So had you, though perhaps you had not put it into words before. She chose one of the ribboned notebooks from the cabinet and placed it on the table. "You may read a little, if you like." You untied the ribbon and opened to a page near the beginning. The entries were brief, each dated, each handwritten in a different voice. "April 3rd, missed my train on purpose after stepping in here. No regrets. September 19th, rained all afternoon. Read by the upstairs window and remembered how to feel unhurried. January 12th, thank you for the room with the stove. It made winter seem possible. May 27th, bought a book on wildflowers and stayed because leaving felt too loud." You turned another page. November 8th, there should be more places where people can arrive tired and not have to explain themselves. The bookseller, who was standing by the window, looked over and smiled as if she knew that one by heart. "You keep these all?" you asked. "I do." "Why?" She considered the question for a moment. "Because there are many ways to measure a place," she said. "Sales are one, inventory is another, but sometimes I think a bookshop should also be measured by how many people breathed more easily after entering it." You let that settle around you. Downstairs, somewhere below the floorboards, the clock marked another hour in its soft, deliberate way. The bookseller then did something very small and very lovely. She turned on a table lamp by the window bench, leaving the rest of the room just slightly dimmer, and said, "I'll leave you here a while if you'd like." And she did. So you sat by the upstairs window with the notebook and watched rain slip over the city. The cushion beneath you was deep enough to sink into. One pillow fit neatly in the curve between your shoulder and the wall. The glass was cool nearby, but the room itself held a steady, old warmth, the kind preserved by books and wood and plaster and years of lamplight. For a long time you did nothing at all. You listened. Rain on slate. Rain in gutters. Rain on the roof window above. Very distant, a church bell somewhere beyond the older quarter. And beneath it all, the immeasurable quiet of a room content simply to be occupied. Eventually your gaze drifted across the shelves beside the bench. There you found a book bound in midnight blue. No title on the spine. Only a tiny silver crescent pressed into the cloth. You took it down and opened it. Inside were short chapters about imagined rooms. A conservatory filled with moonlight and white flowers. A railway waiting room where everyone spoke in whispers. An attic studio above a harbour. A winter library in the far north where the lamps were kept burning all day. Each chapter described a place so carefully and gently that it felt less like fiction than invitation. You read one about a room with rain at the windows and tea gone slightly cool on a small table. And you nearly laughed at the coincidence of it. Or perhaps it was no coincidence at all. Perhaps books, like people, sometimes knew where they wished to be found. The words blurred very slightly in that pleasant way they do when the body begins to soften toward rest. Your eyelids felt heavier now, though not uncomfortably so. The rain had a way of smoothing the edges of thought. The room encouraged stillness rather than attention. Even time seemed to lengthen here, no longer made of minutes but of pages. Sips, roof sounds, breaths. You closed the blue book and laid it across your lap. Then you watched a single line of water descend the window glass, wavering as it gathered smaller droplets into itself. When it reached the sill, another line began above it, then another, endless, patient, unbothered. At some point, the bookseller returned with a folded quilt. "I thought this might be welcome," she said. It was soft, lightly weighted, smelling faintly of clean cotton and lavender. You thanked her and drew it over your knees. She placed a small lamp on the table nearby, its shade made of pleated linen the color of oat milk. The light became softer still. "We close soon," she said, though it sounded less like a warning and more like a note within the evening's gentle sequence. You nodded. But strangely, the thought of leaving no longer felt inconvenient. The bookshop had not made you want to stay forever. It had done something better. It had made the rest of the night seem bearable and kind. The bookseller stood by the cabinet of notebooks for a moment. "If you'd like," she said, "you may write something before you go." When she left again, you sat with that invitation for a while. Then you opened the notebook to a blank page. For a few moments, you were unsure what to write. Big thoughts felt unnecessary here. This was not the sort of place that required performance or profundity. Only honesty. At last you wrote, "Tonight the rain led me here. I only meant to step inside for a moment. But the room with the stove, the tea, the window above the rooftops, and the simple quiet of this place made the evening feel softer than it had any right to be. Thank you for keeping a light on for tired people." You looked at the sentence, then added the date. It seemed enough. When you descended the stairs, the shop had grown even stiller. The lamps in the front had been lowered. The fire in the back room must have been left to settle. Linen had moved yet again, now curled impossibly small in a basket behind the counter. The bookseller was wrapping a stack of books in brown paper with such care that each fold looked almost ceremonial. She glanced up as you approached. "Did you find some peace upstairs?" "Yes," you said, "I think I did." She smiled. And you sensed that this answer pleased her more than any purchase might have. Still, you did buy a book. Not because you had to. Not because leaving empty-handed would have been awkward. But because there was one you wanted to carry with you, a quiet blue-gray volume from the evening's shelf called Rain at the Window and Other Restful Essays. An excellent choice, she said, wrapping it in paper and tying it with green string. It doesn't ask too much of a person. That sounds ideal. Most good evening books don't. She slipped the slender bookmark beneath the string. It was cream-colored, with the shop's name in faded gold and, beneath it, a line that read, "Read slowly, rest often." By the time you put on your coat again, the rain had softened to a finer mist, though it still glimmered beyond the glass. The bookseller opened the door for you, and the little bell above it rang once more. Outside, the street seemed changed, not because it was different, but because you were. The tailor's shop was still dark. The florist's buckets still dripped. The pavement still shone beneath the lamps. But the night no longer felt like something to get through. It felt like something to inhabit. A rainy street, a wrapped book under your arm, warmth still lingering in your hands from a final cup of tea. The knowledge that behind one softly lit window, a cat slept and a bookseller turned down the lamps one by one. You stepped beneath the awning for a moment and looked back. Through the glass, the shop glowed warmly around its shelves. The bookseller moved in the background, slow and calm, as if closing a shop were not an ending but another form of care. She drew one curtain partway across the back room. She lifted a teacup. She paused briefly to stroke Linen's back as the cat remained entirely committed to sleep. Then she looked up and saw you still standing there. She raised one hand in a small wave. You returned it. And then you went on. The street accepted your footsteps softly. Rain purled on your coat. Somewhere nearby a bicycle stood under a stairwell, catching droplets on its handlebars. A window above a bakery glowed faintly where someone had perhaps left a lamp on in an upstairs room. The trees at the end of the street moved slightly in the cooling air. You walked without hurry. There are evenings that do not ask to be remembered because they are dramatic or extraordinary. They are remembered because they restore something small and essential, a sense that gentleness still exists, a sense that quiet is not emptiness, a sense that somewhere in the world, warm rooms wait behind lit windows, and that one may enter them for no grander reason than being tired. As you made your way home, the city seemed full of those rooms. Behind curtains, people were rinsing mugs, stacking plates, folding blankets, putting books down on bedside tables. Someone somewhere was buttoning a cardigan against the draft. Someone else was watering a kitchen herb plant before bed. Someone was reading in a chair with a lamp over one shoulder. Someone was watching rain gather on the sill. Someone had just turned off a light. Someone had left one on. And above all those rooms, the rain continued, soft and untroubled, moving over rooftops and chimneys, down the narrow streets and across the old quarter, touching windows, awnings, signs, leaves, and stone. By the time you reached your own door, you no longer felt like a person returning from an errand or from a city street. You felt as though you had been gently carried through the evening and set back down in a quieter version of it. Inside, the air was still and familiar. You placed the wrapped book on the table and hung your coat to dry. There was no need to turn on the brightest light. A single lamp would do. Perhaps you made yourself another cup of tea. Perhaps you left the curtains slightly open so you could still see the silver movement of rain beyond the glass. Perhaps you sat for a little while without speaking or thinking much, only listening to the weather and the hush it brought with it. When at last you untied the green string and opened the book from the shop, A small card slipped out and fell onto the table. You picked it up. On it, in the bookseller's neat hand, were written just a few words. For rainy nights, and the ones that need kindness. Nothing more. You smiled then, a quiet smile meant for no one else. And when you finally prepared for sleep, the evening seemed to follow you gently from room to room. The glow of the bookshop lamps, the stove in the back room, the cat asleep on the chair, the bench beneath the upstairs window, the sound of rain on slate roofs, the stillness of shelves waiting in amber light. Some places remain with us not because we stay in them long, but because they remind us how to arrive inside ourselves again. And so, later, when you lay down and listen to the rain continuing softly in the dark, you might have imagined that little shop still standing on its quiet street, its sign swaying only slightly, its windows dim now, but not dark, its books settled on their shelves, its fire resting in embers, its cat curled in the basket behind the counter, its bookseller upstairs perhaps, closing the notebook cabinet, straightening the pillows on the bench, leaving the upper room ready for another evening when the rain might guide someone there. You could imagine the city breathing around it. The old quarter with its stone streets and sleeping trees. The rooftops washed silver. The hidden courtyards collecting rain in terracotta pots. The tiny pools of light beneath the lamps. The dark shop fronts. The bakery waiting for morning. The florist buckets filling drop by drop. The tailor's sign glistening under the eaves. And at the center of it all, that one warm, patient place where no one needed to be less tired than they were. The rain falls. The lamps glow. The pages wait. The door opens gently. A cup of tea is poured. A chair by the window remains ready. A blanket is folded nearby. A quiet room keeps its fire. A rooftop bench looks out over the sleeping city. And somewhere, always, there is a light left on for those who need it. So now, as the night grows deeper and softer around you, you may let your thoughts drift like rain down glass. Nothing more is required of you. No rushing. No deciding. No carrying of the day any further. Only the steady sound of evening. Only the warmth of remembered lamplight. Only the feeling of having stepped, for a little while, into a place that was calm enough to hold your tiredness without asking any questions. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps tonight, that is more than enough. So the rain goes on in its quiet way. The city grows still. The bookshop rests. And you, too, may rest now. You may imagine the shelves settling into silence. The last cup washed and left upside down to dry. The curtain drawn halfway across the back room. The little stove cooling slowly into red and then gray. The cat breathing in sleep. The upstairs window silvered with rain. The notebook closed over the words you left behind. The bookseller pausing once before bed to listen to the weather against the roof. Outside, the street lamps glow over wet stone. Inside, every room keeps its own soft darkness. And above all of it, the night gathers you in gently, as though it has all the time in the world. There is nowhere else to be. Nothing else to finish. Only this quiet. Only this rain. Only this slow, kind descent into sleep. Good night.